This album seems a little bit different. He seems to be not attacking the names that he's dropping, but almost trying to build bridges. And you know, there comes a point in a man's life where he really looks at the decisions he's made and the results of those decisions. And he thinks to himself, how can I repair these bridges that I've burnt down?
This Kendrick Lamar, my dude Rambo Hustle. Yeah.
All hustle is all hustle. All hustle is all hustle.
All hustle is all hustle. Stop.
Machine Gun Kelly.
Welcome back to the Hip Hop Report. This is Rambo Hustle, and today we'll be discussing The Game's documentary 3. The trilogy is over now, the third installment to his legendary, iconic, and classic first debut album. Of course, that one was spearheaded by Dr. Dre and Kanye West. But since Game has had a lot of ups and downs, we just saw him in the verses with YG. Game seems not at peace, trying to find his place within hip-hop, within the world. And that doesn't mean that Game's struggling in his personal life. I don't know anything about that. But what I do know is, for some reason, Drake flew Game out to Canada, and when he came back, suddenly we had a Game album in the works. We had rumbles of Game releasing a new album. And so while I think it's super lame that you had to go to the lamest rapper of all of history to get a battery in your back to get you to go out, and not even that, but also spearhead the album with a single with that artist on it, I still have to appreciate that you are releasing new music. I think Game is one of the most legendary artists, not just from the West Coast, but in hip-hop in general, an elite lyrical MC. And you know, not lyrical in like the complex way that Eminem is, or lyrical in the way that like Lil Wayne is with the punchlines. Game has a very particular style to what is lyrical. To me, it's the closest thing that we know to Tupac, where it's not lyrical by technical style of putting words together. And it's also not as clever as what Wayne does with his punchlines, where this is like that and that is like this, and ooh, that was a good line. Game's ability to be lyrical, I think, has more to do with his delivery and his passion behind his voice, the way he uses his voice, and his flows being very meticulously delivered and exact. You can hear everything Game says, and his voice has such a strong presence on record that it's undeniable what he does. It's, you know, the closest thing that I've seen to Game since Game, I would say, is J-Rock. When I first moved to LA and I heard J-Rock, it was Lift Me Up. And if you listen to that record, he's everything that Game carries on record. It's the ability to command the record and to really make it his own. In this album, we don't even get that until track 4. We start with Jesus, which doesn't even go in a minute and a half before we get a Drake name drop. Now, Game is notorious for name drops. That's almost his go-to move to generate buzz and interest in records, is to name drop other artists and things around the culture within that record for interest. This album seems a little bit different. He seems to be not attacking the names that he's dropping, but almost trying to build bridges. And you know, there comes a point in a man's life where he really looks at the decisions he's made and the results of those decisions. And he thinks to himself, how can I repair these bridges that I've burnt down? How can I rebuild the infrastructure to my network so I can maybe recoup some of the losses that I've taken, whether that be that Dr. Dre, whether that be Kendrick, whether that be anybody. The first single that we got was a Drake featured single called No Breaks. We got it the night before, and then boom, album in your face. And while I respect that strategy, I believe that this record had a Drake feature on it, a feature verse, not just 2 words, because I don't believe that Drake flew Game out to Canada for Drake to record 2 words and make it a hook and came back. That's out the door. So I truly believe that this record at some point had a feature. A couple weeks ago, Top made a call and deaded all beef in between Game and Kendrick. And because he did that, I just don't believe that that Game was going to keep that verse on this record, because he wasn't going to diss Kendrick. He wasn't going to choose, as much as he's loyal and he's shown love to Drake and he said that that's his guy regardless. I just don't think that he would create an entire cultural war in the West Coast in LA based on, basically lean on division just to support and be loyal to Drake. I don't think Game is dissing Kendrick at all. I think this record was recorded post-beef. Game was showing loyalty and love to Drake because Kendrick hadn't responded and he felt slighted for that. I think he can keep the peace with Drake and then also not destroy all of his relationships in the West Coast. And I think ultimately that's why we get this No Breaks record with just the Drake hook. Because Top isn't going to tell him you can't have the Drake record. We understand the power of Drake's fan base and the momentum that he can generate by having it on there. But also, you're not going to diss Kendrick on the project. Jesus starts off kind of off-putting because I don't want to hear Drake in your intro. I do feel like there's a huge influence from Drake. There's like 3 or 4 records that are produced by Manish on the Beat, who did the Shebang record for Drake on Iceman, as well as some Conductor production. And those are both very heavy producers for Drake right now. Now, unfortunately, the record has a lot of mishaps. We did a recreation, a reimagined version. It has about 15 records. So I cut out about 10 records from the project. After Jesus, we get Love It or Hate It, which is a callback to Hate It or Love It, which is 50 Cent record that he gave to Game, which is one of his ops. And this is why I'm saying that his tonality on this album, even though he's still using the name drop strategy, seems more collaborative, trying to reel people back in, versus before his name drops would be more for attacking persons. He's calling you out, and that's how he creates traction, by calling people out and creating this tense and turbulent environment for people to have to coexist in, which makes it really hard. And if you guys know Fight Club, most people avoid conflict. Now then we get Snoop on the record also, and to me, I just honestly, this record, even though it sounds obviously basically the same, it's just not the same, it's not better. And you know what they say, if you're gonna do something again, you better make it better. Then we get Steppers, where him and Wayne decide to go double time flow, a style that doesn't really fit Wayne and doesn't really fit Game. And to be honest with you, there's nothing about this record I love. There's nothing about this record that really caught my attention. So I was quick to skip over this one. Pretty much, I mean, I listened to both verses, but I didn't like either. I didn't think that style appeals to either one of their brands. After that, what we get is The Life, Scary Times, and 20 Deep. All 3 records that really stand the test of time to me, as far as landing on Game's catalog and being true to his brand, his sound, and his ability to give us that passion, that emotion, and to be lyrical on record without feeling like I'm being sold a gimmick, like I'm being sold a feature, like I'm being sold this like concept of why this record's even happening in the first place. They seem honest, they seem transparent, and thank God it's not the last time that we get records like this on this project. Now, he does his best to make slaps, so we get records like No Breaks, Geekin', In the Way, and The Part. Now, where a lot of these records aren't great records, they're not standout records or hits, specifically In the Way with Tyga, which, I don't know, that beat is just atrocious. And even though Tyga has been known to make great hooks and great hits and have records that fucking went crazy and plaqued, this just isn't one of them. However, Geeking does shine through with Draco the Ruler, and this is what lets me know that most of this album was probably done for quite some time, especially all the LA heavy records. You know, you got RJ, Mr. LA on this project about 3 different times. You got Lefty Gunplay, you got Ash Chic, which to me, again, you know, him working with these specific artists that were on GNX makes me feel like at some point Game had an intention of working with the same artist that Kendrick was working with, so he could extend the olive branch and say, look, man, I'm going to support your people. Let's fix this. Whatever this is, before the information came out, you know, that Game had Drake come to Compton to shoot the 100 video. Now we do get 40 Nights and Do You Love Me with Cool and Dre and the 40 Nights with Kanye. And to be honest with you, even though these records are okay, I guess, they just don't really fit within the West Coast vibe of this project. Honestly, I don't even know why they're on there, but look, if I had a Kanye record, it would be on my project no matter what the project sounded like. But I don't know if Game is in that position. Game doesn't have to have a Kanye project. He has them on both of them. He has on 40 Nights as well as LA Monster, which personally I like it once you get into the record, but the concept of sampling or referencing that old Kanye record with Lil Pump is just atrocious. And even the concept that you're talking about, you know, Cody the Monster from the LA Crips that founded the LA Crips. It's just like the whole thing was just really weird. It did, like, even when I pressed play, it just didn't make sense to me. There's I don't know if these are risks or conscious efforts to try to make records that are catchy or radio friendly or just commercially successful and viable. Maybe that's something that Game is trying to do, because obviously I don't know how many albums he's got left in him in regards to his artistry and being a rapper and actually generating, you know, the kind of attention that if you're doing it for the love, if you're doing it for the business or the money, you still want results. Even if I'm doing something for the love, I'm going to want the love to be reciprocated by streams or sales. I want to see that people are actually consuming this and I'm not just putting it out just for fun. Now we do get a Leon Thomas feature on here, which honestly, he's on a legendary run this year. He's worked with just about everybody. He was on the 50 Cent Origins theme song. He was on the Rick Ross album, and that record was insane. I loved it. All over the place. He was on the Nipsey album last week. And so for me, Leon Thomas right now is one of the most sought after singers that I've heard in quite some time. You know, I've just been really impressed with his output, and he's been doing so many features that to me it's like the makings of the next great R&B artist. But not all singing and not all references are great. You know, we have Party at Games, which he has Party Next Door, another example of somehow Drake having way too much influence on this project. Why would you do a record with Party Next Door and not let Party Next Door do what Party Next Door does? Why is Game singing on this record? This is just like seems like a Drake knockoff record. We've heard 75 records from Drake that sound exactly like this. Why is Game singing on this record? Then we get Baby, which is a remake of an old Scarface record. And to be honest with you, like, if you're not gonna remake something that another artist has had before and it be better, then just don't make it. Or if you make it, just don't put it on the album, which is kind of how I feel about Hella also. And that's not because I don't love E40 or his style of the Bay, but it's like I don't want to hear Game trying to sound like E40. I want E40 to sound like E40, and I want Game to sound like Game. And Hella gives me two versions of E40, and I only like one. Luckily, we have Nothing to Hide, which to me is one of the best records on this project. It's honest, it's transparent. This is the Game that we love. And while we do love like the summer records and the female records and things like this, you know, that's one thing that I would love to see Game do, is like a female feature, which he does on Game Recognized Game with Marsha Ambrosius, but that's so late in the project. You're talking about track 24, and it's not even upbeat, it's not a good vibe, it's just kind of slow and somber. So I would love to see Game do features with female singers that can allow him to just be a rapper. You know, that's why the hit is lost. That's why we don't have as many hits, because the rappers decided they were going to try to sing everything and they didn't need the singers. Now I understand you don't want to spend the money on the singers, whatever, maybe they're hard and they're difficult to deal with, but there is value in the investment. I mean, Kalani right now, her success is unmatched when it comes to R&B, besides maybe with Leon Thomas, but wouldn't it be great to have Kalani on a feature record with Game? That's something that I really would love to hear. Not whatever this is, but Nothing to Hide to me is top 5 records on this project. And even though it's kind of slow, dark, and somber, that's what Game is great at. That and heavy gangster shit. And for some reason, the super heavy bounce gangster shit just isn't hitting for me on this album. Meet the Parents I thought was incredible. Again, another one that's just deep and just you can really hear Game's emotion and really hear where he's coming from. And just like you can hear the pain in his voice, and that's the kind of shit we want, you know? And then we get The Pen, where I think one of the most pivotal lines on this project, not on the project, because I don't wanna minimize the album to the beef and Drake and Kendrick, because this is a Game album and that's what we should be talking about. But you know, on The Pen, he specifically says, they say I'm beefing with Kendrick. What does that, you know, like he's letting you know he has no beef with Kendrick. That's what I'm telling you. He's not dissing Kendrick anywhere on this album. And any speculation that he is just misguided, misinformed, and incorrect. Then as we close out, we get The Cookout. Again, just a bad sequencing decision because this record is too slow. It's a chill vibe. You got Larry June on it, who's having a crazy year also. His brand is just exploding right now. Too slow, and it just doesn't really make sense with the vibe of where we're going. Nothing to Hide to LA Monster doesn't make any sense. Then Meet the Parents, so we're going like slow, somber, to kind of upbeat, kind of street, to another slow and somber, then slow and like light. It just the sequencing is all over the place. I really think Game needed a executive producer that could have sequenced this album in a way that was cohesive and was easier to listen to, and it made sense in the sense of a story, and it didn't feel like just a bunch of records all slapped together and thrown out because, oh shit, I got some momentum. I think that's kind of what happened. He got some momentum. He met up with Drake. He decided that he put the battery in his back, that he was going to roll this album out because he could generate the attention for it. And then we get I Won't Be Afraid. And I think I Won't Be Afraid could have easily started the album. To me, this is the kind of direction, because again, I'm just looking at Game from what he's showing us, from the energy we've gotten from Game, from what we saw. And again, it's not like he's a super visual person that's out there always doing stuff, but he seems conflicted. When you saw that Versus, you didn't see a man that was at peace. You didn't see a rapper that was like chilling and just enjoying retirement or like living life. Kind of like how you saw 50 Cent come out with Joe last night. Like, he looks like he's chilling. He's dressing like somebody's uncle. Not that 50 ever had much style anyways. But like, you know, like 50 is not a guy that has the best style in the world. He wears hoodies. He wears jeans. I mean, he was wearing a plaid button-up short sleeve shirt. That's not how rappers dress ever. So, you know, like, but again, that just comes with age. That just comes with maturity. That just comes with just accepting who you are. And Game seems still kind of like in the clouds as far as like, how do I evolve and become the next phase of who I am to do that. And you know, when you listen to I Won't Be Afraid and then you get Game recognized Game, you realize that even if he's not there today, he's getting close. And you have to appreciate a man that's willing to expose his ego, expose his emotional insecurities to give you where he's at now. With that being said, Rambo Hustle with the Hip Hop Report, the documentary 3, available now everywhere.